Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode of our Luna Arcana's podcast, Letters from Luna, our newsletter and our podcast. Today, I'm talking to Adriene Jenik, who lives out here in the desert, and she's written for our latest issue 6 on what it's a really beautiful piece. What's our climate future? I'm just looking at um, the future of the climate, the future of the community here in the high desert within the context of climate change. And she has written it within the frame of her really amazing ECOtarot decks, which we'll be talking about more today. I just want to give a quick introduction to Adriene. She's an artist, an educator, and an end of life doula. She lives here in the high desert in 29 Palms. Adriene's computer and media art spans 3 decades and includes pioneering work in interactive cinema and live telematic performance. Adriene's current creative research emerges from her engagement with the desert, its ecology, histories, including the Indigenous communities here, the military community here, and the outsider creative communities who've been coming here, as well as the desert's mythologies. And currently, Adriene is Professor of Intermedia in the School of Art, affiliate faculty in the School for the Future of Innovation in Society, and Senior Global Future Scientist with the Global Futures Laboratory at Arizona State University. So, welcome, Adriene.
Thanks for
Um,
having me.
it's really great to have you here. Glad we managed to get this conversation dialed in. So, would you start off by telling us a little bit about your climate future readings with your ECOtarot decks?
Sure. And thanks for having me. I always enjoy talking about this practice. So in about 2014, I started to realize that it just felt like it was not a business as usual moment in terms of what we were facing with the environment. I had known that for a while, but I just really got the message that that I needed to dedicate more of my practice and my activism and my advocacy, my just being to addressing the planetary concerns that we're facing around human-driven climate disruption. And so I had this idea uh, to make a ECOtarot deck and make it out of all natural materials and then do these climate future readings. So the idea almost like sprung like fully formed in a way. But immediately upon having the idea, the next thought I had was that is a terrible idea. you know, that is going to be very depressing, and no one is going to want a climate future reading. And why would I put myself through that? So I set that idea aside in the dustbin of many ideas that pile up that aren't actually manifest. But it kept coming back. It kept like poking at me. It kept knocking at my door. So I took 2 years to make the deck that I use, and then in November 2017 I began out here in Joshua Tree to offer these climate future readings. I made a small sign that I still use, a little sandwich board sign that I set up. And on one side, it says, "Ask me about your climate future." And the other side, it says, "Free ECOtarot readings." And I had no idea what was going to happen. And people just began to line up, and they continue to line up to this day. So at this point, I've done more than 1,400 readings all around the globe. And I could have done a lot more, but I really measure the practice of when I do it.
Yeah, and I remember you doing those readings here in Joshua Tree when you first started, and you do them outside our apothecary here and at the market. And yeah, just the way that it's it grew it and took on a life of its own from that kind of persistent idea that's like, no, pay attention because I need to be in the world. And I just love how it has just grown in this organic way, because you've done readings, not just here in Joshua Tree, but all over the world.
Yeah, exactly. And it's nice because it's a practice that I can just, grab my bundle and really take it anywhere. But as an artist, I get invited different places, and each time I get invited to either speak about my work or present my work, I also bring the cards. And so I've been able to do readings in Chile, in Finland, in Iceland. I just recently did readings in Portugal, in Canada, all around the United States, many communities in the United States. And I'm sure there's a few more places that I can't think of. And yeah, it's everywhere I go. It's there's people that are interested, in getting readings.
And I'll be putting a link to Adriene's ECOtarot decks, and you can find out more about them in the link below, in the little square below the screen and on YouTube. So definitely explore. They're beautiful tarot decks. I still have the one you lent me, the deck that you lent me. It's really just handmade, beautiful, really tactile decks. And with the art and the illustrations, did they just come through you again in this very slow way? You said it took 2 years for them to really complete.
Yeah, I had already been doing readings, some readings, so I knew the tarot. Actually, my mother was a professional psychic, and so I actually come from a lineage. I roll my eyes a little bit because I made fun of her a lot when I was growing up, and this is kind of her revenge on me, I think. But I grew up knowing about the tarot, about the archetypes of the tarot, and also really from her was gifted with a really deep understanding of a world beyond the world that we can see. And just that was a natural thing that was, carried with us throughout the day. The power of dreams, the ability of dead people to visit us, all of that was something that was just really naturalized in my everyday life, and I'm grateful for that, because it's helped me in my life to really be grounded in that understanding that there is something greater than ourself, and that this seen world is not, all that there is. But uh, most of the people that sit down with me have actually never had a tarot reading, which I find fascinating, because I had no idea who would sit down with me. And they're the cards themselves, it took so long to make them for a few reasons. One is that I did take a long time to the deck itself, it shifts. So I don't use the same archetypes. I play with them. So some of them that your audience might be familiar with, of course, the sun, the moon, the star, the lovers, justice, some of those are retained, but then many of them are transposed into thinking about our climate environment. And so, for instance, the emperor is the world leader, the Hierophant is the teacher, the fool is the artist, the tower is the superstorm, the chariot is the bicycle. So it took me quite a while to, really, some of them fell into place immediately, like, of course, that is that. But some of them were a bit more of a struggle. And so it took a while to develop those. So I was doing that. And then I was also sketching out and doing mock-ups of how the visuals, how I wanted them to look. I knew I wanted them to also be on handmade paper, and done with natural pigments. So that was a whole process of experimenting with how to make the paper. One side is made from agave paper, which actually turns out it's very difficult to make paper from agave. However, it is very strong once you make it. So that felt like something important, and it was quite beautiful. And then the other side is recycled cotton and linen. And so how to understand how to make the cards, doing different formulas, figuring out how to meld the two types of paper together and making sure they weren't too thick, weren't too thin. So that was all a process. And then even the process of making the pigments, deciding on what pigments to use, what palette to use, and then even the process of figuring out a natural fixative. So I had come that far, and everybody was like, oh, you have to use a chemical fixative, otherwise it won't stay, you know, it won't be protected. But I had a feeling that people had fixatives before we had all these chemicals. And sure enough, there's a casein, which is like a cow milk based fixative that, you know, of course, like Rembrandt, all the people that were sketching, this is the kind of thing that they used. And doing experiments with that, finding a good one, and then being able to apply that. So all of that before I was ready to do the readings took 2 years. But what was great was the depth of engagement then with the cards. And so when I finally did the readings, I really felt like very, very connected, you know, to the cards, and have come since doing the readings to really, you know, trust them. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I love that the whole process in the kind of physical manifestation of the cards, all the different materials, the stories behind the material that you're looking and finding. So it's like it's not just like, oh, this is a card, this is an object. It's like it's this kind of magical creation that's been coming through. And like you say, this the connection between yourself and the cards now, it's like that you trust them is so beautiful, because that's the thing with doing tarot readings. And I'm not a tarot reader, professional tarot reader by any means. I just do my own little spreads and pulls. But that trusting, that kind of that relationship with the deck is so important. And that you just went your own way, even while people were like, oh no, you have to use a chemical fixative. Yeah. And so that tactile approach, that tactile experience with the cards, how do the individuals that you give readings to, how did they respond when they are in that space of getting a reading and they're touching the cards and they're looking at the cards, and many of them for the first time receiving a tarot reading, and an ECOtarot reading now at that, which is completely one of a kind. So yeah.
Well, what we call, like, this is a big word, but it basically means like the way that something's embodied is like proprioceptive, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So the tactility, that aspect of the texture, of the feeling, of the materiality, right, is extremely important, because I'm doing the readings. I usually, when I do them, it's way less often. It's like maybe 3% of the practice is like in a private setting, which is a more common way to do tarot readings. 95, 97% of the time that I'm giving ECOtarot readings, I'm out in a public setting. And so I rely on a bunch of different things to create that sense of like the magic circle of that special space, of that sacred space of the reading. And one of them is that I just create a really beautiful, you could call it a mesa, like I create a really beautiful setting. And that setting actually has like material, like linen that's been hand woven. There's it's embroidered. There's a space. Actually, I realized I should have set up a mesa to show, but I also have rocks from the area that I carry with me. Those, of course, anyone who lives in the high desert knows those have a practical value, in that if it's windy, I can put the rocks on the cards so they don't blow away. But they make for also just a very beautiful tactile setting. I have my little bit of whatever I'm using to smudge. We use juniper and cedar now, local, easily collectible herbs instead of sage, because sage, unless you're growing it yourself, has been we're being guided by our indigenous friends to not utilize it anymore because it's being over utilized. So I have some kind of, you know, aroma smudging, a sustainably sourced Palo Santo wood that I do blessings with. And so there's a nice, like, kind of a little space that people get a sense, oh, this is a special space. And then when I tell them, because part of my introduction to doing the readings is to tell them that in order to do these readings, I made this deck of cards, people immediately, they just are like, oh, am I even allowed to touch that? I'm like, of course, that's part of it. And what's fascinating is that the deck that I use, it lasted for the entire 1400. I keep thinking about switching it out because it is getting a little like dingy on the sides and stuff, but the cards themselves have really held up. And they have now all that, like, we think of it as like a well-tuned deck. Like now they have all of that.
Yeah.
Mojo in them. So it's really hard to shift it out. But people get that sense when they're touching it. They have also many people comment that the cards are very soft. They're not, we're used to holding paper that's not handmade, and they've become softened by all the hands. And so that actually, all of that is very important to get them, so that when I tell them to like drop into themselves, to connect with the earth, they're already connecting, with this plant material that's been made, so they can really feel that. So it becomes a way to assist them with the portal to like really connect and be in the reading. Yeah.
Love that. And just especially for people when it's just this is their first experience, that portal that receiving a tarot reading draws you into, is so special. And I know we've talked about this before in our conversations, and just like, how do people respond when they're, like receiving a reading, like, just the kind of the emotions around it, the grief around it, the joy, the kind of surprise around it, the kind of being the recognitions and rememberings that a tarot reading brings, but within this very specific context of our ecological situation and our ecological future.
Yeah, so just before answering that, I'll explain a little bit more about what makes the ECOtarot, a unique type of reading. And that is, like, often with a regular, a standard tarot reading, you come with a question, and the cards are read completely in relationship to you and your life, right? In the ECOtarot, in the climate future readings, with the ECOtarot deck, what I do, the question is, what's gonna happen? What's the world gonna be like? And what's my role in the world? So I already have kind of organized the question in a way. And that question is one that is connecting you with the larger world. So it isn't just about, your own little, universe. We're all completely interdependent on everything around us. But in modern culture, we have the illusion, we get to have the illusion, or we're blinded by the illusion, is another way to look at it, that we are somehow separate from everything that's happening. And the ECOtarot does that work to really reconnect people, imaginatively, speculatively, like in terms of how they're even thinking. And so I have developed for this practice a number of different spreads. So for people that don't know, the spread for a tarot reading is the way that the cards are organized. And each of the positions has their own meaning. So the cards all have their own meanings, and then the positions all have their own meanings. And the reading is kind of, growing out of those, the combination of those things, and also kind of an understanding from what the person's telling you about what they're thinking of. So I have the most common reading I do is a 2-card reading, because I usually have a line. And when there's a big line, you can't sit and do a longer reading. So that reading is primarily 2 cards, although more cards can come up. And the first card is really the picture of what's going to be unfolding in the larger world in the arc of that person's lifetime as it relates to climate change. So that's the picture of the larger world. And then the next card is really talking about a role for that person, a helper card to help them navigate what's going to come up, some values they can foster to assist them moving through that. And so that first card, it's often kind of a crazy card. It's often like not good, quote unquote. Although there's some interpretations of some cards that definitely are things that you might want to align with. And of course, we don't know what's going to happen, and there could be. I mean, I hold out hope that this break and this reckoning that we are facing already, and we are sure to continue to face, that is brought on by human-driven climate disruption, actually can destabilize us and help us create something new. So that's my kind of hope I hold out, within this. Yeah. But having said that, the first card really creates the space in a way to really face, like what we're facing. And then many people have strong reactions to that card. Some people, frankly, they're carrying so much ecological grief and so much intense like feeling and sensitivity around what we're walking through that when they sit down, they start crying.
Yeah.
So it's, that's a place. This is a place. I'm creating this little space to be able to, just face that and witness that together. Because that's something really important, is the witnessing, my witnessing of, what they're saying, what they're sharing. So that first card, whether it's you're facing the loss of like species loss, that's the Ace of Earth, whether you're facing the privatization of water, there's whether you're facing the albedo effect, which is a scientific effect that as the ice melts, there's less reflective surface on the earth. So these are climate science informed, the cards. So we're really like sitting in the reality of like what this means to be at or beyond a tipping point, and people share, what they've been thinking, what their fears are, again, depending on the card, what their hopes are. If that's something that often that they think about, sometimes it's something that they're already evolved in and addressing, in their lives. So they share, wow, it really is all over the place. And then the next card is really that card that is their role, or again, this helper card. And that card is usually something that they can really like connect to and hold fast to. And that's just fascinating to see what comes up, how that resonates with the person. Most often it does, sometimes it doesn't. And, that's fine too. But it opens up a kind of conversation of like, what tools do you need? What capacities do you have? Many times it's an opportunity for them to share something about like how they understand themselves in the world. And for me really to just like, as you mentioned, the idea of underlining or like, kind of confirming things that they know. Many, many times that's a part of it. And sometimes it's a kind of quality that it's something that they've really take for granted. Like the justice card, when that comes up, a lot of people that walk in the earth with a deep, deep understanding of fairness and justice, they kind of take it for granted. They don't even know that, like, no, not everybody carries that. Even though they know that this is a deeply unjust world, they still kind of have this feeling. And so it's this opportunity for me to really also like strengthen them, in that purpose, and with that, and encourage them to like really be honoring that capacity and to not, let it fall to the side, to bring it into the foreground more and more in the ways that then, of course, then the storytelling of how that connects to the other card. I also have 5-card spreads, and those are a little bit different. They work on the directions, so north, south, west, then east in the center, and the symbolism around each direction. And so those go a little bit deeper. If I have more time or there's not a line, I give people the option to choose those. And then I also have an 8-card spread. Those I just do by appointment. And those spreads are for people that are already working in the ecological field. And so they go like a little bit deeper to unveil to them some things that they may need, more tools. They just go deeper in that. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, there's so much. It really doesn't surprise me that these cards were persistent in their needing to come through, because it just the space. I mean, I haven't personally experienced a reading with you. I hope to at some point
You
soon.
haven't? That's so funny.
I think
Oh,
I'd just be weeping.
all right.
One of those people who just, and I actually like watching the trees behind you and their kind of gentle swaying in the breeze as you're talking is very, it's just kind of, I'm feeling things.
Mm.
But yeah, just, the space that is created as just, like you said, people can sit down and just, the emotions just start to come through because they can sense. And I feel that this is also that your inherited gift from the lineage that you're in, that you're able to channel in that connection with the unseen, with the subtler realms. So people can just come and sit down, even if they're in like the crowded farmers market here or whatever, they can just sit down in this bubble, this space is created. And they're like, oh, this is, I can just feel these feelings, but I can also process them in this very specific way with the beings that these cards are and the archetypes and the energies that are coming through these cards. And so it's such a kind of unique creation that has come through you and that you have birthed into the world. And and the fact with, I love what you said about the 8 card spreads, that the people who are already doing this work and are established in this work, to give them guidance from the larger interdependence of the spirit realms, our plant allies, the environment, the elements coming through you. And so what's the reaction from them? Because I guess they're more used to kind of doing the work, the activism work in the world from this kind of outward facing way. So when this wisdom's coming through you and they're able to relate to it and sort of respond to it with a kind of like, yes, that resonates. What are their...
Well, a big part of the readings is, as you know, as you say, it's really a structured, conversation and a structured dialogue, and the cards, what I've come to understand about them as the deck and tarot as a technology, is that its power is in both the symbolic, realm and the way that provokes things in us, but also in its capacity to kind of shuffle our thoughts around and to get us outside of our usual kind of patterns and grooves of thought. That kind of shaking up, it turns out, is really critical, because we get, we have our shtick. I have my thing. I say, if I was to just sit down with you and we were to start, and we probably have had these conversations, we'll just go down this like rabbit hole of, whatever we usually say. But the cards disrupt that, right? They
Yeah.
immediately, and they make these other constellation points, right? Because the cards aren't unique just within that position. Then they start talking to each other and you start to get this bigger picture. So a lot of my work actually in the readings is also listening. So I give possible interpretations, but I always tell people that the most important thing is what they see or what they've been being told. So I strongly believe that we all have the deep wisdom we need to like move through this earth in the way that we do, but that in this modern world, there's too few opportunities to really connect to that and really deeply listen. And one of the things we're very lucky here in the high desert is that we can, at moments there's some silence or something approximating silence, right? And we get to, personally, I've experienced like learning from the land over time and all that's, really taught me. And so that's part of my belief of like, we each have those. So, of course, this is a very much smaller frame, but I'm assisting you in connecting to that, to your own wisdom. Right. And so the 8-card spread, what's beautiful about it is it's a spiral that first goes in and then it comes out. And so it's this beautiful process of like going deeper into, what, like, whatever it is, their fears, their sorrow, because a lot of times we don't do the growth we need to do because we're holding back, because we're so afraid, we're really afraid to like look at, what does this look at? Or what's my greatest fear? Or what's like my, deepest, darkest, despair. And anybody that's working, anybody that, your audience knows that's working with the environment really closely is like how you deal with that. It's really, really, really difficult. And so this is a space of structured way of going deeper into that, but then we come out, and I mean, what I observe in those readings is just like a kind of and this is surprising to me, frankly, with all the readings,
Mm.
and something I'm studying right now. But the structure of it is one that people aren't depressed, as I originally thought, that they actually feel some sense of agency, some sense of, again, that connection, like really can make a difference in terms of like sending you in some grounding way to like feel connected, to what's going on, and not push it away, not ignore it, not deny it, not distract yourself from it. But I've seen it refresh someone, and a feeling of like recommitment even, to like what, and sometimes a kind of crack of something new, to think about, because all of those readings include what's something that's like in the back of your mind, or a new thing, new perspective that you can bring into this. And a lot of times those things are really, useful, for people to hear.
Yeah, and especially the kind of a reframing of the the archetypes that you mentioned. Like, I love that uh, did you say the tower is the great storm, and the fool is the artist, which really that is so appropriate and accurate. And just so, yeah, the reimagining through those archetypes, and how, yeah, and just the channeling of that now into this, within this new context. And so, what have you heard back from people, like after their readings, and like once they've had time to digest and metabolize and process and integrate all the things? Um,
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, it's pretty random, at this point. Although I'm working to systematize some parts of like the way that I reflect and record, what's happening instead of just being anecdotal. But yeah, people both write me on email, but also, I mean, here in the high desert, or other places that I circulate, people will just come up to me and be like, "Yeah, I got a reading from you 2 years ago, and I still think about it," and they remember the card that they got, I'm like, wow, that's amazing. So yeah, so I feel like there's something definitely resonant, and that's, again, the power of symbolism. And this is part
yeah,
of, I'm referring to this. I'm actually in the process of doing my PhD in sustainability, where I'm studying the practice, because I feel like it's doing something with climate communication that's not happening with usual climate communication.
mhm,
In that,
mhm.
most of the time we're reading a newspaper, we're reading something about it, and like, again, like we just feel really depressed, and we can't wait to flip the page, or whatever. It's just, and also obviously standard climate communication, we've made some changes, and changes are certainly happening, I don't want to deny those, but the radical, reshaping of our entire, infrastructure, and things that we know that need to happen, and that need to happen on like a larger collective,
Yeah,
global level, not just an individual level, but certainly that's aggregate, that we need a way to, like, that's not happening. And so why is that? Well, certainly education and communication, have something to do with it. So that's a part of what I'm studying. We keep talking about the cards, so I just thought I would bring them
yes,
out.
please do. I have.
'Cause it seemed,
I should probably return this deck. Maybe this deck needs to be your new deck. I haven't really like handled it too much.
oh, no, no, no. So that deck, that the reproduced decks are, those are not the handmade paper.
Okay,
So,
okay.
yeah, so those are,
Bring
yeah.
them as
So don't
well.
worry about it. But these are the handmade paper. So this is the
Oh yeah.
agave, this is the agave paper. I mean, it looks the same, but it feels really different. And then this
Brilliant.
is the recycled cotton and linen, and here's the ace of water.
Oh.
And so actually, I'll just say one thing I'll say is that my minor arcana cards, which are the instead of the cups, the pentacles, the swords, and the wands. One of the levels, anybody that reads tarot knows, is that one of the levels or the ways that those can be read is in relationship to the elements. So the cups are like water, the wands are like fire, the swords are related to air, and the pentacles to earth. And people read those kind of astrologically, and then, around the elements, that's another layer of a way that tarot readings unfold. And so when I made my minor arcana, I was like, okay, well, clearly that's what I'm doing is the elements. So the water cards are like the cups. And so in addition to their own unique meanings, they also take on those layers of the cups, which have to do with the emotions. And so that's another layer of how I read the reading. So the interpretations are like a mashup between sort of climate science reports, sort of values, and then traditional tarot readings, and they evolve. So in that booklet that comes with the reproduced ECOtarot, I have like a whole updated booklet that I send people on PDF because both it's larger, the booklet's really teeny, so the print is larger, but also like the interpretations continue to evolve, like as I learn more, as things change, like they all evolve. So the air cards are pictured like the windmills. And so this would be the 8 of air. And then for this, it's nice because when you're reversed, you can see that there's like a smokestack. So it brings in that meaning. And then the fire cards are all they're all the sun.
Oh, beautiful.
And they also relate to both things getting hotter, but also to, so here's another fire card when it completely takes over. So this is the
Really
10 of fire. And then the earth cards are the crystals.
Yes.
So the magic
All of
and
those have
mystery.
came up in the reading that in the spread that you did.
Yes. Yeah, which was really beautiful. And so, but just to say that one of the reasons, because, some tarot decks you get, there are 78 unique cards. Each card, is has a different story in it. And I ended up working from like an earlier model. If people are familiar with the Marseille deck, those were earlier decks that had the major arcana cards, which are like here's the teacher.
Oh, gorgeous. Yeah.
So I ended up working with those minor arcana cards that they're all really simple in a way. And that was important to me because I'm trying in the cards to also reflect values that I believe are important for us to cultivate at this time. And certainly we live in just an unbelievably complex, more and more complex world. But like, what is that doing for our mental health? What is that doing for our ability to connect with the earth? So I feel like this, like holding up the value of simplicity. Well, we're going to have complexity. We don't have to worry about that, but calling in the capacity for us to just really, really like dial down into something and appreciate, the simplicity of, how something tastes, how something feels, like what, just the simplicity, your gut, like your intuition. Oh, people can dismiss that. Oh, that's too simple, your feelings, whatever, like just really getting into that space, and not overcomplicating things, because again, that's something that's already existing. We don't even need to try to bring that in.
And that's the mind, that's the mind, the intellectualizing, the conceptualizing, the way that the kind of the non-indigenous Western, the word I like to use, the colonized brain has learned to process and not really relate to the world. And so like 3 things that you brought up, interdependence and deep listening, and just now the value of simplicity, of really kind of being more, you know, just inclined towards the simplicity, because the complexity, like you said, it's already here. We don't need to feed that machine anymore. But yeah, interdependence and deep listening and simplicity, and all those three things are such fundamental ways of being and feeling the world from Indigenous cultures all over the world. And really, that's where we're being asked to turn towards. And like, I think we've talked about this in our conversations before, but just this centering of Indigenous wisdom traditions and Indigenous values as we confront this climate situation, and that the science around climate, around solving these problems, really kind of defers to these Indigenous values, and is in service, sort of is serving those Indigenous values, is rather than the science leading the way and Indigenous kind of voices are over there, kind of nice to have, that's a pretty thing, and then but we're not really paying attention to them in any practical, grounded way.
Yeah, I mean, it's so critical, and thank you for bringing that up. For people, some people may not know that 80% of the remaining world's biodiversity is actually stewarded by the remaining Indigenous, you know, people that are like stewarding it. 80%. So right away we can say like, okay, they know something that we don't, you know, that we don't know. I think, you know, a big thing around Indigenous teachings that I'm like, that have been shared with me both personally in oral and ceremony, but also there's more and more Indigenous scholars that are writing, you know, within the space of sustainability and other spaces, that are writing with permission, with guidance, with accountability to their wisdom traditions, but are writing to share, you know, the knowledge and knowledges that they have with people. That many Indigenous people now have been called, you know, at this time, not just to protect their wisdom traditions, which are really critical, but also to share, you know, on some level. So there's more and more. At my university, I'm really pleased to say there's many Indigenous students and now Indigenous faculty members. And it's a really actually exciting time for that sharing to happen. And I hope that that it can happen more and more. And indeed, and their belief is so both protecting and understanding and stewarding their own belief systems, but also understanding that it is about deeply connecting and listening to the earth and developing a relationship, understanding that we are in relationship, that the earth is our mother, that you know, the coyotes are our brothers and sisters, that the stars, you know, are related, and treating them that way. You know, how do you treat your mother, you know, and how do you treat each other? And can we actually begin to understand and center relationality, center reciprocity, center that aspect of not just taking, you know, which is the modern way of taking more than what we need, of hoarding that, but giving and taking. And how do we understand that reciprocal relationship? And then certainly, you know, the issue of respect and responsibility. So those are often considered the 4 R's: reciprocity, respect, responsibility, and relationship. And when we center the relationships, you know, when we center that, so many other things become clear. It slows us down, you know.
Yeah,
It's not a
yeah.
quick way to
No,
go,
and
you
I
know.
think that's, you know, I probably in your work and my work, you know, we operate in very different kind of contexts in the work that we do, but probably we come across a lot of resistance with the people that we work with, or, you know, within the communities that we move through, that into that slowing down, because our bodies have been so yeah, we just that it feels really unsafe to slow down and to not be in the machine, the productivity machine. And yeah, and that slowing down, because our bodies belong to the earth and are part of the earth, and we need to kind of reorient to those cycles. And really, this is all indigenous. These are all indigenous truths and values and wisdom that need to be adopted, as because we were all at some point in the distant past indigenous to somewhere, living in wherever we originally came from, living in this way. Our ancestors are, very, very, very old ancestors. And so it's said, bringing that now, and then we have this amazing science that can serve that can really help to bolster that.
And that's actually, there's a beautiful concept of this idea of two-eyed seeing that
Yeah.
Created by an elder that is really about, like, it's not just about going back to the land and living. And so it is about, like, how do we take the best of science, technology, the things that are also gifts that we've learned that we're part of, they've emerged from our systems. How do we take those and really bring them together? Or like braiding, or like there's a belt metaphor that's also used that's really about this kind of parallel. So it isn't about casting aside technology or science. It's really about how do we make these enable these things to come together, and how do we really again develop these core values of listening, of interdependence, of like centering relationships. I do want to say that in the cards there's a pedagogical element to them, and I bring in some indigenous elders and teachers. So in the court cards, these are the court cards. So I actually bring in Spanish as well. This is La Guerrera del Agua. So instead of the knights, I have Las Guerreras. And I brought in Spanish just to acknowledge we're in a multilingual world. I just wanted to bring that in, bring that into consciousness. And Las Guerreras are the fighters, but it's like also someone who has a warrior stance.
Yeah, the protectors, the warriors, yeah.
And La Guerrera del Agua is, so in addition to all the ways I read this and people can see themselves, I also, when I'm doing a reading, I say, well, another layer is, if you're wondering kind of what kind of person is this, I give you an example of a heroine, of an ecological heroine. So this is LaDonna Brave Bull Allard, and she was an amazing Lakota Sioux historian who was one of the people that learned from the young people and started the whole Dakota Access Pipeline protest. And the way she worked to start that was by offering her land and holding up that vision of the, peace camp, that this would be, we would be water protectors, not water protesters, and really just holding space for that to happen and having that imaginative place. So that's the warrior spirit, is holding the space, calling that into being, manifesting that. So beautiful. And bringing her into the mix. And, with each of these people, take down, they'll write, oh, who's that? And, they'll go back and like learn something about that person. So there's a pedagogical, element.
Yeah. I love that. That's really powerful. And because I guess for me in my line of work, and I'm again making the assumption that you see it too, but this disconnect that's here right now of, we need to save the environment, like humans are going to save the planet, and that comes again from such the hero's journey, that kind of Western very masculinized, we're going to save, la 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 la, rather than we're going to listen and respond, and work with what we've got, and work with our communities and the interdependence. And just this, so that within the kind of ecological activism field, this disconnect that's happening with people who are going out to save the environment, but they're not rooted in that deeper kind of indigenous values and wisdom that we've just spoken to. And so then they get completely burned out, just filled with despair and sorrow, and how am I going to do, and just kind of go into this depression, this sort of paralysis almost, it's so helpless, because it's seen as like this individual against these big corporate entities. And it's like, no, it's not, we're part of this much. So how do you think we can, I mean, we're doing it in our own work, as you know, but collectively, how can we start to, just on a day-to-day basis, like, it's like, oh, we see something, that this is this injustice that we can feel like really palpably, can we just pause and listen first to what wants to come through us, rather than going, I'm gonna just like shout about it on the internet. I don't know.
Yeah, the internet, I would say, in in certain instantiations, it's not bringing out the best in us. I will say, I just want to say that I do, as both a teacher, which I work with a lot of young people, and someone who's now gone to like the Congress of Parties, gone to activist settings, and am around, a lot of environmental activists. I actually see the young people really getting it, to be honest, and getting that they need to work together, and that their a bit capacity to organize and to care for one another is as important as, rushing off to do something. I I see that, and I see those values being cultivated, and that acknowledgement. Also, what I saw at the COP was that the young people and the Indigenous people were completely
Yeah.
connected.
Yeah.
That in the Young People's March, the Indigenous people were put at the center, and those voices were
Mm.
centered in the rallies afterwards. There was a massive in Glasgow in COP26. I was there, massive rally. And all at every point, Indigenous voices were centered, and not just as a like lip service. Like
Yeah.
there was real acknowledgement that this is teachings that we need to learn from at our peril, at our
Yeah.
peril. So I will say I definitely see what you're saying, because there is that instinct in our culture for sure. But I do also feel like more and more there's teachings that people are understanding that, for instance, in 2020, with the increased attention on the dismantling of white supremacy and the importance of that, even if it seems like it hasn't consistently, stayed. I mean, those teachings did stay, with the whole swath of culture. And
Yeah.
one of the things that people did here, I think, is to be suspicious of urgency. We
Yeah.
can feel really urgent, but, guess what? The solutions there's not going to be one solution. There's going to be many solutions. And also, sadly, it looks like we're going over these tipping points. So my attitude is that rather than despair, that what we need, the values that we need to cultivate to continue to address these issues and perhaps make changes so that the worst of what is predicted to befall us doesn't happen. Those same values are what we're going to need to work together to adapt through it and to face it. So we
Yeah.
might as well just start cultivating those values.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so that's kind of where I'm at, is just like, okay, I'm going to walk in this direction. I'm going to walk at the pace that I can, that's sustainable for
Exactly.
me. And I'm going to notice who's also walking in that direction and do everything I can to kind of support, more and more people, bring more and more people, walking in that direction. And even if during my lifetime, I don't see the shifts happening, I do believe this is unsustainable. We can't continue this.
And that urgency
We're a
has to
planet
really,
based on overconsumption and waste. I mean, it can't, we had, even if we don't understand our limits, the earth has limits, it's limited. We have a limited amount of fresh water, for instance, here in the high desert, right? What does that mean? So, understanding our limits becomes a really important one. And that definitely pushes against all the teachings of the modern world, and including in art. A big way that we teach art is to go beyond your limits, or just
yeah.
even teaching the idea of a breakthrough and pushing beyond, and all
Yeah.
the metaphors that we
Yeah.
use, to teach, to learn,
Yeah.
they all need to be shifted. So that's
Overcoming, pushing through these things. Yeah.
all of it, like,
Yeah.
going beyond, all the, I mean, it's served a certain kind of purpose, but I do believe that, you know, that we're in a different moment now
Yeah.
and we need to be learning different things. So,
Yeah.
and I know,
Yeah.
you know, from our conversations in the past that that's something that we hold, you know, deep together. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love how you brought in that, just sort of becoming suspicious of this enforced way of operating in urgency, which is what has got us into this mess in the first place. So we can't, to quote Audre Lorde, and anyone who kind of knows my work will be like, oh, she's about to say it. She's about to say it. The master's tools are not will not dismantle the master's house. So we have to look at different ways, and yeah, and like, what's my natural rhythm now, and like, how am I receiving that from the world around me? And yeah, I'm just noticing the time, and we've gone over our time. I mean, I just it's gone in a flash. And yeah, I mean, there's so much more that we can really talk to. I want to talk about, but I realize that it's yeah, just want to respect your time, and maybe we can drop in for another conversation at some point, because I just feel that there's so much more to explore within the context of the work that you're doing. I mean, we didn't really even get to talk about your work as an end of life doula, which again is really so relevant to everything that we've spoken to, the importance and the sacredness of sort of that end of life time, which, again, we've been trained to be in resistance to and in repulsion to and keep pushing away, but it's coming whether we like it or not. So how can we, like, again, with earth-based people, earth-based communities, indigenous communities, they really hold that time of life as sacred. So really want to, maybe at some point we can have another conversation about, because people don't want to talk about that, don't want to talk about the end of life time. But yeah, we
I'd be
both.
really happy to, Rahini. I always enjoy speaking with you. So
Yeah. Yeah, well, thank you, Adrienne. Have a beautiful rest of your day out in the
thank
sunshine
you.
there. And I've
Thank
got some.
you. I will. It's another gorgeous day here in the high desert. And yeah, thank you so much. And thanks to the audience that's still here listening. Really, yeah, appreciate your attention.
Thanks, everyone.
All
See you
right.
next time.